As the name implies, post-structuralism is a response to the theory of structuralism. It is both malign and incredibly destabilizing, but we will get to this second point in a minute. Before we discuss post-structuralism, we need to have a basic understanding of structuralism. In a nutshell, structuralism presupposes that there is an order to our utterances. Based on linguistic theory, structuralism assumes that language and speech are merely the manifestations of the rules of the system of a language. These rules are informed by and inform society and its construction. Ferdinand de Saussure, the Swiss linguist, credited with laying the groundwork for structuralism, argued that words are like coins. Each word signifies its meaning, all the synonyms and antonyms attached to the word. Implied here is a level of rigidity, an assumption that one culture's lexicon can be considered universal and to some extent static. By the 1950s, artists, theorists, and philosophers started questioning structuralism, and post-structuralism was the result. Both Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, considered the main agitators for the new theory of post-structuralism or deconstruction, highlighted the oppositional nature of this linguistic sign system, where a word's meaning is constituted by its difference from other signs. Evolving from this observation is the premise that language, and by extension reality, is slippery. Meaning is dependent on being defined by what a sign is not. Rather than being structured, meaning is constructed by this confluence of differences. If meaning is constructed, slippery, and dependent on a series of differences in flux, then it can be deconstructed, slippages exposed, and the subjectivity of these differences revealed. One of the primary tools for structuralism and post-structuralism is the T-chart. A listing of a sign, its associated meanings, and its corresponding opposites or differences, a charting of the binary nature of language. The underlying assumption of structuralism is that a sign maintains its binary. Deconstruction attempts to show how this binary can be collapsed, how constructed the meaning actually is. Take the binary of European and non-European. Listed under each are the attributes or synonyms typically associated with both terms. One of the most useful aspects of deconstruction is the idea that we do not control signs and meaning. Often signs reveal biases we may not even know we have. For example, whether you believe the synonyms listed under each category, the average person has these meanings buried within his or her psyche. And labeling something European or non-European conjures up these other meanings whether you would intend it or not. On the other hand, this concept allows us as critics to detach intent from meaning. The text reveals hidden truths about the author or progenitor. Note that these approaches are rooted in linguistics, but apply to all meanings, especially societal and cultural ones, hence the use of sign instead of word. When applying post-structuralist theory to cultural phenomena, consider sign binaries. What are the commonly accepted meanings and differences? How fluid are these boundaries and categories? What biases or assumptions are revealed by the language or sign? Does the cultural product or phenomenon expose societal construction? Does it actively challenge accepted binaries? Does it reveal its own construction? Another useful theoretical framework is post-colonial theory. This is, in itself, a problematic term, but post-colonial thought seeks to highlight and displace the prevailing hegemonic vestiges of colonialism. The term is problematic because such critical investigation predates many colonial territories' independence, so the idea that it follows after colonialism is problematic, i.e. post. Instead, one can consider it anti-colonialism. The term also recenters colonialism in the discourse. Colonial thought and practice maintain that the colonizer's culture was central, all else peripheral and non-substantial. For example, Rochester's estranged wife Bertha in Jane Eyre is a Creole, someone of a culture born or living outside the center of that culture. She is a shadowy figure whose only purpose in the text is to be the antithesis of Jane's Europeanness. Jane Rees, as an example of anti-colonial response, takes Bertha out of the shadowy attic and tells her story in the wide Sargasso Sea, set in Rees's home, Dominica. This is also an example of recentering the colonizer. Bertha is still white, European, and actually a colonizer. Another example is the persisting insistence that foreign is better. Further, as a former colony, the foreign is better still if it is sourced from the former colonizer. Therefore, having the word colonial intrinsically linked to the theory itself keeps the specter of colonialism front and center. Post-colonial or anti-colonial theory exposes this centered and marginal binary and often focuses on the marginalized. Post-colonialism also investigates the effects of colonial history and hegemony on a person's psyche, especially a person's sense of identity. The colonial or formerly colonized subject is often conflicted, torn between what he or she has learned civilization is and what his or her surroundings proclaim civilization to be. There is a tension between the educated West Indian and the uneducated, between the artificially constructed middle class of the Rwandan Tutsis and the suppressed Hutus, or basically any middle class in a former colony and the suppressed lower classes, between the Indian civil servant and the masses in Calcutta. In each instance, the middle class or subaltern is often sandwiched between the indigenous and the colonizer. They find fault with the indigenous practices. They may even deny that it is culture, while exalting the culture of the colonizer. At the same time, the subaltern are all too keenly aware that as a subaltern, they could not mingle with the colonizers. Omi Baba describes this as hybridity, and a crucible for creating resistance. Facing pressure from both sides, the subaltern often leads the charge for independence while modeling the fledgling democracy on the laws of the former colonizer. One of the drawbacks of hybridity, though, is the assumption that the proletariats, those farthest removed from this in-between tension, do not just generate sustained resistance. When applying post-colonial theory to cultural phenomena, consider: who is centered or recentered? Do we follow the marginalized, the colonized, or do we focus on the colonizer? Or is it that the colonized are yearning to be like the colonizer? Who is marginalized? Who is pushed out of the narration or production? What is the relationship between the product and its colonial past? Does a cultural product dismantle colonial hegemony? Does it reinforce it? Is this an instance of hybridity? What syncretisms exist? Is there tension in these combinations of cultures, i.e., culture clashes? What identity conflicts are expressed? Is there tension within the individual? How does the person identify his or herself?